I'm super honored to have our guest speaker, Diana Chu, with us here today, and I will let her introduce herself right now.
Hi, everyone. My name is Diana Chu. I am a marriage and family therapist and also a registered drama therapist in San Francisco. So as you can see, I have a dog with me, and I'm also very involved in nonprofit work, and so I'm doing a lot of like mental health consultation and also therapy work within the neighborhood in San Francisco. So if you're local, please check out the website link and see the resources that I put in there. And if you have any other questions about like getting a therapist or something like that, let me know, and I could connect you with the best therapist that I know of.
Yeah, please feel free again to use the chat function or the Q&A in the Zoom. If you have any questions, we'll answer it during the Q&A portion of this webinar. For those of you who have been following UNAFSA since 2018, Diana might be a familiar face. She's been, I believe this is your second webinar with us, Diana, and you presented at conference before. So really love and appreciate the support and the collaboration with UNAFSA. And I'd love to just give you a second to share more about the work that you do before we dive into the topic of burnout.
Yeah, so I really want to give you guys a glimpse of like the organization that I'm helping out with at this time during the coronavirus period. But this is the organization that I wanted to highlight for you guys, because if, you know, this is a pro bono, you know, like I do this for free, but if you want a compelled to put some donations or like your volunteer time and community, this is the organization that I want to vouch for. So the organization is called Tell Hi. Tell Hi is a neighborhood center in San Francisco, which is in the North Beach area if you're local. It provides a combination of like free and low cost programs for like different age ranges. So like from infants to toddler to after school program, early childhood educational programs, senior program. They have a gym, and they, you know, like do all these kind of stuff. So right now, they really need your support, because during this time of crisis with the pandemic, they're still serving the community. So like providing emergency childcare for kids, for families, that is for essential workers. And also they are running the food bank. So if you know anyone who is unemployed or like need food at this time, you know, you could direct them to the food bank, which is in Marina Middle School in North Beach. And every Thursday, they're there to like give out food for everyone. And also senior services and reaching out to families as well. So I would love it if you want to donate. Please consider donating to them. I'm a huge supporter for them.
Awesome. And if you're new to the EmPower Up webinars, basically we created this webinars with the understanding that civic engagement can be very daunting. It isn't always the most appealing or fun thing, and I want to acknowledge that. But if you're kind of early on your journey and you don't know what it is, this is the place for you. We really want to break things down into things that, even if you have no civic engagement experience or you know nothing about the topic, that you have time to learn and for us to meet where you are. So if you're at the beginning of your journey, you're at the right place on this webinar. And I'm super excited to talk about burnout and mental health, because you cannot lead, you know, if you're burnt out, if you're not prioritizing your health. I think we got to lead sustainably. I've seen so many people personally come and go because they take on too much at once, or they don't focus on their health at the same time as their community work, which is why we have Diana here. Oh, sorry about the horn in the background. So this is the place for you. And so, yeah, we just try to provide context for some civic issues. We try to make it easier to participate. And really, we want people to be motivated to take action, which is the most important thing. Wherever you are in your civic engagement journey, start somewhere, right? I know that voting can be like the simplest thing, but you can always do more. You can get involved in your local organizations, such as Tell Hi, right? Even in your professional world, right? Diana's a therapist during the day, but she also volunteers her time to Tell Hi. So any action and small steps is really what this webinar EmPower Up is about. But of course, we have to lead from a healthy individual perspective. Just a quick fun quiz for you all and a trivia is, what portion of adults in the US and Canada do you think experience mental health issues each year? Option A, 1 in 25 adults. Option B, 1 in 15 adults. Option C, 1 in 10. And option D, 1 in 5. Feel free to type in the chat what you think your answer is, or just make a mental note, and Diana will talk more about kind of the statistics and why mental health is truly such an important thing. Awesome. Give everybody a second to submit their answers and their guesses. And the answer is 1 in 5 adults, and I'll let Diana take it from here.
Yeah, that's a really, you know, like sad statistics, you know, like 1 in 5 adults, like they are having some kind of mental health issues. And mental health issues could be something that you could see physically, but also most of the time is something that you cannot, you know, really like see in terms of like it's very different from like you broke a leg or something, right? So there's no like wound, which is like in the surface. So today with this topic about burnout, right? I wanted to, because our time together is limited, and I wanted to be very focused about like what we're going to talk about here, specifically about like how can we see the warning signs of burnout, right? And then see how it impacts you and your family, and how does it impact the relationship, right? And different strategies to make sure that like the burnout rate is going slow and steady, but also like how can you avoid these things, and like how can you support your community, your friends, and also if you're in the position of power as a leader, how can you avoid your organization or your team to feel having these kind of like feelings of like burning out. Okay. So we're going to go through burnout. What's the definition of burnout, right? So burnout is like two things. One is exhaustion of physical strength and or the emotional strength. And it's typically is due to like prolonged stress and frustration. So when you think about like, okay, I'm stressed right now, and then you kind of like have the onset of stress, and then after that it become a chronic stress if it's like longer time, and then burnout will happen after chronic stress. Okay, and then after burnout, it will be like a habitual burnout. So this is like continuous like burnout. So when it's habitual, it's like it's really hard to like kind of like go back and like rejuvenate and then go back again. So like when you go to habitual burnout, it's like very serious. So burnout, typically we use it in like career, you know, occupational phenomenon. And so like I want to talk a little bit about like how like we could you know, like how can we manage it in a way that like it's we could see the warning signs and then also see how can we manage it. So some of the warning signs, typically you will have like low energy or feeling exhausted all the time. Because burnout is mental, but it's also physical. So your brain and your body is linked. And so potentially you might get sick more frequently. And knowing about your habits, you know, like you see how it impacts. Maybe it will have an onset of like for women, girls, like potentially you will see the exhaustion and sickness close to your cycle as well. So that's something to notice. The negative or unhappy feelings will come up. Lack of motivation about, okay, I have all these deadlines I need to do, but I don't have enough motivation to do it. Withdrawing, procrastination, staying in bed. That's like one of the top 10 that if you don't want to like be motivated. Especially with shelter in place or like, you know, like when you're cooped up at home. So these are the specific signs that might happen. Feeling disengaged or checked out. And then the last two is interesting, is can let go of perfection. So when you cannot let go of perfection, you kind of like have that cycle as well in terms of like how because you're mentally exhausting yourself. So this is one of the warning signs, a symptom that you could see, and not recharging and relaxing. So it is important to notice, like, we have a lot of warning signs, but doesn't mean that you have to check all the marks in order for you to consider as burnout. So burnout for you and for me, for Kevin, it will be different. But it's about like, how can you notice where your baseline is? And also, are you going up or down right now? Okay. So if we have burnout, right, what is the impact, right? We're talking a little bit about long term. So there's like different impacts that potentially to have. Like, one is the professional consequences in your job. You might not like your job because you're feeling unmotivated. So and that, like, it will affect your work performance, and then it will become, like, not able to do your job well. And also, like, because you're disconnected, so you're going to have like a withdrawal relationship with coworkers. And then the second part is the health part. So as I mentioned, there's the onset of stress, and then chronic stress, and then burnout, and then habitual burnout. And different people receive stress differently, right? And how they kind of like respond to stress is also different. So some people might feel depressed, some people might feel anxious. That's the consequence. And then there's the high risk of high blood pressure and diabetes as well. And in order to do like wanting to calm your mental health down, like the energy and like the stress. So a lot of people might go into like alcohol or substance abuse, and that's like self-medicating, right? Because you're not treating something right, then you might self-medicate to calm your nervous system down. And alcohol and substance is like the go-to for some of the people. And then lastly is personal consequences. You lost your passion for community work, because if you cannot focus on your own core work as already, then how can you, like, be passionate about community work? Isolation from peers, and also frustration and anger. Yeah, so those are the impact that burnout has. So we'll do a little bit about strategies. Okay, so the strategies that we're talking about on the left, right, it's applicable to all the areas on the right, so the different areas. So we'll go through the different areas. First, your work or your study, family, relationship, your partner, volunteering, or as a leader in the organization. So how do you manage expectations? So set clear, concrete goals. So for example, a concrete goal will be something like, a concrete goal will be something like, I will exercise 30 minutes every other day. Like, so there's a time limit, and also there's like a specific duration that you could track. So rather than say, oh, I'm gonna exercise more, like, that will be very different from, I'm gonna exercise 30 minutes every other day, right? And then you set like a very clear goal. And then the next one is adapting to changing expectations. So because like life just goes on, we did not expect that there's a pandemic that's going to happen, right? So like, how can you expect changes? So it's like imagining yourself on a boat sailing on the river, right? Like, if you're gonna not change and you're on this boat standing still, you're gonna drown. You're gonna not go anywhere. But so like, in order to go somewhere, you have to move with the boat. So that's like what we call resilience. That's what we call like adaptation. That's what we call like ability to transition, right? So if you have a strong ability to transition and adapt, then you'll be more successful in managing different stress. Yeah? Transparency and honesty, and this works well with communicating with your boss, communicating with your partner, your girlfriend, your boyfriend, about your expectation, communicating with your volunteer leader about like what you can do, what you cannot do, right? And then the fourth thing is saying no. It's actually pretty hard. I think we learn to comply, especially if you're from an Asian cultural background. We want to satisfy our family, and you know that kind of like wanting to give is basically like we're programmed to be able to say yes all the time. So saying no for some people might be very daunting. And as a leader, if you're in a leadership position, the art of like understanding your peers or like the people who are your team is to understand like when a person is wanting to say no and they could not, right? So where is their satisfaction level and where are they at right now? You don't want to force them to say yes, right? So giving a little bit more space and saying no. And then the last two is prepare for problems. How can you prepare for problems in terms of like anticipating what will happen? Okay, I cannot follow through this goal, so how can I troubleshoot? And lastly is communication. So communication is something that we will talk a little bit more about, I think, in the later slide as well. So this is an exercise that I want to share with you that I use it a lot, especially in a pandemic. I provide consultations for teachers as well, and so this is something that I use a lot. So on a piece of paper, you draw a circle and you put in what you can control, what you cannot control, okay? So it could be something along the lines of, just to give you an example, is I can control how much time I spend on social media, but I cannot control what the news is happening, or like I cannot control the coronavirus, okay? I can control how much times I wash my hands, but I cannot control how clean is my work environment or my transportation, public transportation, right? So thinking about like what you can control and cannot control, I use this a lot with my clients as well, because specifically if you're in a burnout situation, you might not be able to control the outcome of a project. You might not be able to control the how your peers sees you, or like your boss, how do they react. But you can control how you manage it, how you communicate, how you feel. You can control how much time that I put on for healthy food, healthy exercise, you know. So thinking about that will help you to understand, to let go of the stuff that you cannot control. And then focus on the stuff that you can control. And then slowly your circle is going to go bigger and bigger, and you will feel a little bit more confident about like what you can control, and then let go of those that you cannot control. So this is a really good tool when you have like a team or when you're stuck, you know, with a specific situation. And this is very empowering for yourself, or like even for my clients, to see that in a very concrete way. So I encourage everyone to like try this out when you notice that there's something that you feel stuck on. Okay. So going back into communication, one thing that when we're talking about this webinar, we talk about like how can we communication needs and desire, and that's the crux of like you know, like communicating about burning out, because like these are good for these communication tips are good for people, like for example your friend who you might notice that they are burning out, or you yourself reflecting your needs and desire to your boss, to your peers, to your family. So do a lot of check-ins. So when I do check-ins with friends or families, we don't want to like overwhelm them. Okay, so we don't want to say, oh, let's do a check-in right now, and the check-in lasted like an hour long, right? So you want to actually do small doses of check-in. So I'm gonna call a friend today, and then like it will be 5 minutes, and that's it. Or I'm gonna send a text, and there's no obligation of like continuing to text or like continuing that conversation, because the more that you check in a more periodically, like small doses kind of way, then the other person do not have the obligation to feel like, okay, when Diana called me, I have to like set like a long, an hour-long conversation, and they might avoid you, like if there's some kind of obligation. But you make it like short and sweet, for some, and of course there's some people that you might want to check in longer. But short and sweet is the advice I would give you all. So people will say like, oh, Dana, like what if I over communicate? Is that a good thing or a bad thing? It is actually a good thing. Don't be afraid of over communicating, because the key to communication is to making sure that the other person is understanding what you're saying, right? So over communicating, it's preferable, because then you'll have like less chances of miscommunicating. But the key is understanding the different ways of communication. So for example, my parents might communicate in a way where you really have to talk to them face to face, okay? So that like that's how they could understand, okay, I get what you mean, right? Maybe your partner or your romantic partner might be communicate in a different way, right? Like through different gestures, or like, okay, through walking together might be a better way. So understanding like your boss or your team, what is the best way of communication, and what is the best way to reach them? Some could be texting, some could be email, right? You also notice that like some people respond better with text and some people respond better with phone calls, right? So understanding what's the best way to communicate. And also, if you are burning out yourself, you want to find out your preferred way of communication and then use that. And vice versa, if you notice that your friend is burning out. So ask for what you want more of, right? That's another one. Like rather than, oh, I really don't want this to happen, or like I don't want more hours of work, I really want more of support, right? I really want more free time. So when you phrase it that way, the other person listening will actually like feel like more comfortable, because you're on a more of a positive reframing. I want more something rather than I don't want this, okay? And then the other thing is understanding energy. So when I put this down, I'm just like, oh, how can I explain this to you guys? So imagine like everyone have different kind of energy level, right? And you notice like your partner or like your boss or like your family, where is the energy level? If someone is burnout, the energy level might be very low, right? And if your energy level is high, super high, hey, we're gonna go to all these places to, so that we're having fun, even though you want to help them, they're not reciprocating because the energy level is very different. So you have to kind of like come down a little bit and have them like you have to meet them where they are at, right? And vice versa. If your family or your boss, or your team leader has a really high energy level, right? Okay, you have to do this, right? You kind of like, how can you, like you're here, how can you help them come down a little bit, right? If you go up here, you're gonna crash, okay? You're gonna crash. So how can you kind of like go down a little bit and then, okay, maybe the boss will come down a little bit too, because humans, we always mirror each other. We're like so good at mirroring. So if we use that as our advantage, like understanding the energy level, the emotions, then you kind of use that in your advantage. Yeah. And then the last thing is active listening with respect. So even though it might be hard to hear some things about yourself, or when you're expressing yourself, or having feedback from your boss, right? So active listening is really crucial, but also holding on to the fact that like it's a respectful conversation. And active listening is something that we have to really try, look them in the eye and like sit them down, you know, that kind of stuff. Okay.
Awesome. And Diana, I'd love to come back to this recovering from burnout, but want to also save time for the Q&A. So I'd actually love for you to elaborate more on this really cool chart that we have here. And then we'll jump into Q&A and revisit the recovering from burnout.
Yes. So I want everyone to like look at this chart. This is a Ikigai, which is like a Japanese concept meaning like a reason of being. If we don't have enough time, I want you to like kind of like Google it and see and read a little bit more about it, because it's actually a Venn diagram of like what you love, what the world needs, what you can be paid for, and what you're good at. And the overlapping of those things is the Ikigai. And by finding that for yourself will help you tremendously on like finding your purpose and to avoid burning out. Because the crux of it is like, if you're doing the stuff that you are passionate for, you're not going to burn out because you have that drive. You know, the likelihood of burning out is pretty low. So finding that will be very important. So Google that. You could like put down on the circles like what you want, what you love, what you're good at, and then like find that little sweet spot that you could potentially find. Yeah. So Kevin, are we going to Q&A?
Yeah, so I want everybody here listening. I think, and as you know, Diana, a lot of people within the UNASA and VSA community have been student leaders or community organizers to some extent. So whether they were VSA e-board, you know, resident advisors, or just other youth organizations and student organizations, I think a lot of us have experienced or have gotten somewhere close to burnout, in which, right, there's a lot on our plate. I think I hear the term, I wear many hats a lot, which is basically just a nice way of saying, like, I'm doing a lot more than I can handle, is honestly my perspective, right? That term, it's a nice way to put it that way. So everybody listening, I just want you to think about, have you experienced burnout, or have you witnessed your peers go through burnout? And then what happened after that, right? Because I've worked with people in VSA where they gave VSA their all, like they gave it the 100%, even sometimes prioritizing over school, which I know is not healthy, but like, you know, like we've all probably done it. And afterwards, like you get too burnt out and you can't continue the work. And just kind of what happened to that. So the first question I wanted to ask you, and I'll stop sharing my screen now, Diana, is if I have a friend, or if I'm working with somebody and I notice that they're taking on a lot and they seem really stressed, and I want to approach them, how do I talk about this touchy topic, right? Because I don't want to make it sound like, oh, like you can't handle like what's on your plate, but at the same time, I'm noticing that they're really stressed.
I think going back to what we talk about, like the active listening, right? Like the first thing when you approach a person and giving them advice, it's a no-no, right? You don't want to give people advice first. You want to listen to them first, right? So having them talk about like, okay, I really noticed. So you would say something along the lines of like, I noticed that you are feeling these things, or like I noticed that you're working really hard, right? And then kind of like helping them to understand, helping you understand, wow, what are you working hard about, and like how can I help you with that? And sometimes there's not a solution to it. It's all about managing expectation and managing it. So remember the energy, right? Like if the energy is pretty low, you want to match that. And then also providing like support. The support could basically see, depending on the person, if it's someone which is like in a chronic stress, burnout, and then a habitual like burnout, like they might need like more support than just you know, like, so directing them to like a professional to help them, because they will have strategies, right? So that's something that I will suggest.
Yeah, Could you elaborate the difference between feeling stressed and burnout and then feeling anxious or having anxiety? Like what is the like medical difference or like what is the difference?
So feeling stress is prior to burnout. So that's the, that's the cause of burning out, right? So stress and then prolonged stress and then burning out. And burnout is the symptom that's happening. And then for burnout, different people manifest burnout differently, right? Some people could be depressed, some people could be anxiety would kick in, right? So it depending on like how you're responding to stress, those mental health symptoms will come up, and that's the that's what you don't want, right? So yeah, does that
Uh,
make sense?
yeah, and then like what would be anxiety then if somebody had anxiety?
So yeah, so the same thing, like so burnout, because it manifests in different ways. It could be depression, it could be anxiety, it could be like I'm not going out at all, right? Antisocial, right? So like anxiety is a sub part of like the symptom, and anxiety is basically like your mind is always at the future, like wanting to think about like, okay, what's going to happen, and like having like breathing will be different, or like having the stress which is like in your mind. So anxiety can manifest in different ways. Some people would be very tired, but also some people would be very, doing a lot of things. So it depends how it manifests. So definitely consult a therapist or a psychologist if you feel like you are having anxiety, because being anxious is pretty normal. But if you're very anxious to a point where you cannot, that the anxiousness is impacting different aspects of your life, then that's something that we will have to work on or like talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, speaking about asking for help and going to therapy or going to talk to your doctor, uh, what might be common responses you might get from your initial visit? Just because I know a lot of folks here are probably young, might have never gone to therapy, and they're thinking about
Mm-hmm.
it. If I go to a therapist and I'm telling them I'm feeling really burnt out or I'm feeling anxious, what might be some initial responses you might get?
You mean as the therapist? Like what
Uh,
kind of things that I will say?
yeah, like if you're at the very beginning of seeking out help
Yeah.
and this is like their first time talking to a professional healthcare person or a therapist,
Mm-hmm.
what might be some questions they ask?
Mm. Um, okay. So as the client, you want to explain to the therapist or like the mental health person on like what's going on, right? Uh, so typically in therapy, a lot of people go to therapy because there's a trigger or like an incident which is like heavy, and they cannot. Okay, it's too much. Now I'm going to go to therapy. So typically, as a therapist, I will focus on that piece first, right? Because you help with the client on like calming down the nervous system and also calming down the crisis. That's what we say. And then after that, then we will go into like something on managing the stressor or managing the symptom that is happening. So different people will be different. If you are a client trying to find a therapist, I would highly recommend like go to if you know a therapist, or if you don't know a therapist, go online, search someone who like think about the criteria that you want, right? Just like dating, right? Just like dating, like it doesn't work the first time sometimes, because you're sharing like yourself or like your emotions to a therapist, and you have to make sure that you feel safe. You have to make sure that you feel heard, right? If you, I would recommend thinking about cultural sensitivity, right? If a therapist have cultural background, have that kind of training, what kind of modality would you like the therapist to give you, and what kind of personality would you like the therapist to be? Like someone who is really warm, or someone who is doesn't give you like bullshit answers, right? So, you know, like to figure out what you want, and then you kind of like ask for referrals and that kind of stuff.
Got you. We'll be answering some of the Q&A a little out of order, but I think Dana's question relates to what you just talked about, which is how do you suggest folks seek professional help or therapy in the current times? I've heard of teletherapy, but feel virtual meetings might not be an effective as in-person meetings.
Okay, so this is a strange time that we're in, you know, like I have to transition actually my therapy sessions, my consultation sessions from in person to online as well. And I did online drama therapy for like quite a few years. I wanted to say that like the healing aspect of therapy is different, but it's still very powerful online. So as a therapist, I could sense that like, okay, there's some kind of difference. So it's just like when you meet your friend online, online gaming friend, right? Let's say it's very different from like you meet a friend in the community that you see each other during volunteer work, right? Though both friends could be acquaintance, but the flavor of the relationship will be different. So just like that, for me, I think for online sessions, I do have clients who follow me for a long time in online, and it has the benefits and it has the pros and cons. You know, thinking about like asking your therapist about confidentiality, like even if you do online, do you have a safe space and a quiet space, a confined space at home that like you can feel free to express what you're saying, right? So those things will come into mind. I would highly recommend going online. It is actually okay. I see my own therapist too, and she's online right now. And I think the quality of therapy is very similar. And it depends on the skill set of the therapist too. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point that you said earlier, Diana, which is your first therapist might not be the one. Like you said, dating, it's you got to give it a couple of shots. I recognize that not therapy is not for everybody, and when you're feeling burnt out, it might be as simple as just stepping away from the work you're doing and doing the things you love. Maybe you already know that, but I think to everybody here listening, I would like to echo your point that give it a try, do your research, because not everybody might meet your, like finding a therapist of your same background and stuff like that.
Yeah.
I think is super important.
And you should interview your therapist, you know, like
Yeah.
ask them hard questions. It's like, how are you going to help me, right? Like, especially if you're paying out of pocket for it or like using your insurance, like you will, as the consumer, as the client, have the right to like figure out like if that's a good match, right?
Yeah. Pulling back to our audience, many of our audience doing work with the Vietnamese community, Lillian asked, how can a younger community leader fight apathy in the older Vietnamese community? I feel a large part of burnout is that we feel sometimes we're fighting a losing battle, trying to bridge the gap between the older and younger generation. And to summarize her question is, how can we assist the older generation with their own burnout? People that might have been doing the work a long time, or people that might not believe in the work anymore.
First of all, tell them to like watch this webinar if you can, right? I think it's about communication, because our style, this generation, younger generation style of using technology, right, or using different means of adaptation is actually way more superior than like older generation. So thinking about in their context of like how can we as younger generation like, you know, bridge that gap, and understanding where they come from too, because like transition is hard, right? In the older generation, they might have a longer period of time staying in the same job, right? Younger generation, they might jump to different jobs and different times, right? And like the transition is different. And so their way of understanding burnout will be different from ours as well. And they might not see the warning signs because they feel like this is what it is, that is actually habitual burnout, like if it's chronic, right? So how can, the question is, how can we as a community, right, educating them, people who need this kind of like talk, right? Like we talk about mental health because we feel like there's a need, right? The more that we talk about it, the more that like this webinar and the next webinar will be more and more people to join us, right? So how can we in the community to like deactivate these kind of like conversations, and then they will be able to you will be able to support them in a more effective way because you are listening to their needs. Yeah.
And sort of related to that question, sometimes we see a lot of self-blame for our burnout, for our anxiety, like, oh, like I wasn't ready for that position, or I took on more than I can handle. But by definition, at least from what I know and what we talked about earlier, burnout is defined as being workplace stress, or stress caused by your workplace. And for our sake, we're expanding workplace to VSA in school as well. When somebody comes in and they're blaming themselves, could you give us advice from a therapist perspective, but then from a friend? Like if I'm a friend and I'm hearing my friend have a lot of self-blame for their work.
So as a therapist, I will actually go into their understanding of like where they're at as a child on like the idea of performing, right? When someone talk about like I'm not good enough, right? I took on too much, right? Self-blaming. I'm not up for this, right? These kind of quality always like stem from like the environment and also like the upbringing of, you know, like who told you that you're not good enough, right? All those things. And so I think it's something that is potentially like I could explore as a therapist. As a friend, self-blaming, it is really hard for people to navigate, because if you just like say, oh no, you're good enough, you know, or oh no, like you're actually good enough for this position, or you're ready, or you know, that kind of stuff. So I would actually shift it in a way where when a person is saying that they are doesn't have the capacity, basically that's what they're saying, is asking them, what if you only have like 80% of the work that you're having, or 60%? What is the capacity that you could feel comfortable right now? Specifically, if you're a leader, if you could ask that question, it's actually very revealing. Okay, and like really asking the friend, like, how can I help you to make you feel more confident, and what kind of tools you need, right? Maybe that person is just like, oh my goodness, Zoom is like too much for me. I could not do Zoom, and then another person could help take on this, right? So it depends on and finding out what is the need of the person that you're talking to.
Yeah. A question I'm seeing is, as a young professional trying to get into my career, how do I balance continuing my community work and also prioritizing my own professional development? So either I'd love to hear from your personal experience, like as you were getting your master's and your license, were there things that you had to just let go of? I think sometimes we have to let go of things, but I'd love to hear your input about that.
Yeah, definitely. I think one thing that comes into my mind is capacity, like understanding your own capacity. You could like, sometimes we could work a lot, but then if someone in the family is it's not appreciative, let's say, right, or say something, then it impacts how you interact with your work immediately. So for example, like understanding what is your capacity for each aspect. Your capacity for volunteering might be really, really high, but your capacity for relationship might be lower. So like, how can you expand your capacity, which is in the lower spectrum, to stronger and higher? And that will be using like, you know, like practices in communicating about your needs. Yeah. I think it is important to pick and choose and say no along the way, because today it will be okay for you to do this, right? 100%. Tomorrow it might be different. Right?
Yeah. And something about capacity is sometimes you stay in an organization long enough, you pick up multiple roles, and then all of a sudden you feel like you hold a lot of the responsibility or the institutional knowledge. So like you just know too much about Telhai, or like maybe like I know too much about UNAFSA, and then I'm afraid to let go of it, but it's hard to pass it on. How might you respond to that? Somebody who's feeling really stressed or burnt out, but is afraid to let go of that like responsibility.
I think it's come down to preparedness, right? Like you could like figure out which pieces are the things that you feel like, okay, other people could take on, and then slowly letting that go, right? Also understanding that like it's not forever that we're gonna stay in this organization. Like even though we desire to do that, the likelihood of that is low, right? And understanding that piece will help you to know that your way of letting go is actually helping the organization to grow as well, because you're mentoring another person, giving them opportunities, right? And that will actually build a stronger team, because if you're doing it yourself, there's no team. If you're doing it with like other people, then the community is built, and that's the purpose of UNAFSA.
Yeah, I'd like to pivot back a little to just seeking therapy as well. Is if somebody is seeking help, is burnout classified as like a medical condition, or is it? I know we said earlier it's like a work phenomenon. Like if you were seeking something to help with your stress, what might your therapist or doctor respond to or respond like?
So it's more about the symptom, right? Burnout is an umbrella term for what's happening. So if the symptom that you're having is anxiety, right? So you might be in a general anxiety disorder. So depending on the symptom of what is manifest. So I think when we talk about burnout in an organizational term, the reason why is because it helps the organization and the leaders to think about how to avoid that within the team, because it all goes down to productivity, right? Like if you have a team which is burnout, you don't have enough productivity. And so that's the common language for people in the workspace to talk more about that. You solve the burnout problem, you actually have more productivity. But in the mental health realm, we look into the symptom. We have a DSM, which is a really thick book, and we will flip through it. And if you check those points of like the symptomology, or like having those things that is checked, then you have that as a diagnosis. But it also depends on like how what's the level of it, right? Yeah.
I know in the presentation we didn't get back to it, but I think this is a good time to talk about the day-to-day stress monitors. I know that's what we wrote in the tracker, things like breathing, exercise, getting enough sleep, and like eating well. Could you elaborate more about what does it mean to like track your stress?
So in terms of tracking your stress, is a rating from 1 to 10. So 1 is like I'm not stressed at all, and 10 is like I'm like so stressed and like So if you're noticing that you have burnout symptoms, or your friend have burnout symptoms, like having them like write down what's the level today at this moment, right? And then like eventually after a week or two, you could actually see the ups and downs, and then potentially tracking to see like if it correlates with other stuff. It could be correlating with like, okay, it's Monday, and that's when I have higher stress level, or it's Thursday because I have a meeting with my boss, right? So if you're able to track that, then you're able to anticipate it first and also prepare for it. So for example, if it's Monday, then I have a lot of stress on that day, then how can I make set myself up for success in terms of like, okay, maybe I'll have a better breakfast on Monday. I'm going to take a walk in the midday, right, on Monday. And then like if it's like a Thursday, I'm going to talk to my boss, right? And that's a stress level. How can I make sure that I have enough sleep Wednesday night? How can I make sure that I'm prepared for that meeting for Thursday so that my stress level is lower? So tracking it will help you understand your behavior. So that's the easiest way to do it. And of course, like unpacking, that's the unpacking of like a correlation of different stress, but I'm also focused on the basics. And you know this already, like breathing, exercise, getting enough sleep, eat well, you know, it's really simple. Like everyone knows, but no one do it, you know, like it's time to do it and it works, okay? And the last thing is like, how can you give a vacation for your mind, not only for your body, but also for your mind. And it could be as simple as like taking a break and going to the bathroom, look yourself in the mirror, or walk out and look in the window. And that's a little vacation that you could give your mind. Yeah.
Awesome, thank you for that. I'm going to ask one more question, or actually we have a Q&A. Are there any resources within NASA or related organizations that provide supports for leaders and civic engagers or people doing civic engagement work?
There are a lot of resources out there. There is, I really like, there's like this organization called Trauma Informed, and they have a little chart about what kind of organization, like communication, especially in the pandemic, and talking about like how you give space, you know, to your staff, and different strategies. Let me pull it out. It's actually called traumatransformed.org. And I could send this out. So this is the 5 C's leading during a pandemic. So this is a PDF that I feel like is a pretty powerful tool right now, because we're in high stress level right now as a whole, as a community. And these are different steps that they provide. So there's like giving people clarity, build team cohesion, connect with your people, communicate, and have courage and confidence. So these are like some don'ts and to-dos. I give this sheet to like the teachers and the leaders that I work with, and it works really well. So I would highly recommend you to take a look at this. Yeah.
I love that, Diana. The 5 C's of leading during the pandemic, I think if anybody's in a transition role with their VSA e-board or their community leadership roles, to check it out. I feel like there's a high degree of uncertainty right now. So if you check it out, everybody's adjusting and resources are coming and going, or like people are adding more resources each day. Mm-hmm. Last question I wanted to ask you, Diana, before we move on to kind of closing and like any last remarks you have, is just somebody seeking support, if they're low income or they're like a nonprofit worker and their salary is not that high, what are some options? I know that sliding scale is a term that people throw out there, but could you elaborate more, or could you expand?
Yeah, so sliding scale is actually a term. Yes, you're right. So if you don't have enough income or resources to get a therapist, you can first go to nonprofits. Typically, and if you're studying, if you're associated with like a college, like look it up. Like they typically have like a clinical department where there's counseling, and then ask them for referrals, ask them for like sliding scale, because a lot of therapists want to give back to the community and able to like provide that kind of resources. I know that if you're an essential worker, there is a lot of resources out there right now, specifically pandemic related. And then lastly is local, like find out your community centers locally. Ask your doctor if they have like a sliding scale fee or like insurance base. I think like doing a little bit of research is a long way to go, and you could always ask me as well for referrals. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. Diana, I'd love for you to just have any last remarks that you didn't get to touch upon. Shout out your email and do one more shout out for Tell Hi for us before we close out the webinar.
Yes, like I really, really love Tell Hi. So please go to the website, take a look at what they're doing. I think the organization is like needing a lot of support right now at this moment. So if you could spare $1 or $2, I would highly recommend this organization, vouch for them. I want to thank you for this opportunity to share my knowledge, my understanding of like, you know, my skills. And so this is a great, you know, relationship and community we're building. And I am grateful that I'm part of it.
Awesome. I think that's all we had for today then. And thank you very much, Diana, once again for being on the webinar and your continuous support with UNAFSA. If anybody has any questions, feel free to reach out to Diana or contact UNAFSA or civic.engagement@unafsa.org. And we'll connect you with Diana if you're looking for any referrals, questions, whatnot. But that's all we have for today. And thank you everybody for hopping on. Awesome. And thank you, Diana.
Bye.
Bye, Diana.
You're welcome.